She is going to be talking to us about navigating the context, finding North in university. So Lauren, thank you so very much for joining us, and I'll pass the word over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rianne. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you. I got to see some faces earlier in Tammy's talk. So good afternoon, good evening, maybe it's even morning for some of you. Here it's the evening. So let me just share here my screen. All right. So hopefully you can all see that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. See, great. So while we are all scattered throughout the world in different time zones, I'd like to take all of you to Amsterdam in 1942, where under the German occupation of the Netherlands, there was one Jewish young woman, Eddy Hillesum, who kept a diary. And at 28 years old, she had this reflection. The restrictions against the Jews were increasing. And she wrote, "This morning, I cycled along the station quay, so along the water, enjoying the broad sweep of the sky at the edge of the city, breathing in the fresh, unrationed air. And everywhere, signs barring Jews from the paths and open country. But above, the one narrow path still left to us, stretches the sky, intact. They can't do anything to us, they really can't. They can harass us, they can rob us of our material goods, our freedom of movement, but we ourselves forfeit our greatest assets by our misguided compliance, by our own feelings of being persecuted, humiliated, oppressed, by our own hatred, by our swagger which hides our fear. We may, of course, be sad and depressed by what has been done to us. That is only human and understandable. However, our greatest injury is one we inflict upon ourselves. I find life beautiful and I feel free. The sky within me is as wide as the one stretching above my head." Eddy here is making this incredible discovery of her inner freedom, a freedom that does not depend on having multiple options in front of her or being able to do whatever she wants. Rather, it's a freedom that she always has that can never be taken away, because it is a type of freedom of how we choose to react to the world before us and what kind of person we become. Tragically, Eddy herself was deported just 1 year later and killed in a concentration camp. But her words, her letters, and her diary survived and have inspired thousands with their human struggle and search for meaning. And I was inspired by this spirit of freedom to put as the title of this talk, "I am the captain of this ship." Well, which ship? The ship of your life, the ship of my life. And there are three elements I'd like to look at your time in university: personal development, intellectual development, and having a service-oriented mindset. And Brianne already said a little bit about who I am, but just to put some images to it. I'm originally from Wisconsin, which is in the north, not exactly underneath Canada because we have a little bit of Michigan there, but you can see where Toronto is, for instance. I studied in Princeton, where I majored in philosophy and minored in neuroscience. I graduated without any clear plans of what I wanted to do, much to the despair of my parents, but I was fortunate to find a job working in software companies as a technical writer, most recently in Google, and right now I'm in Rome studying philosophy, but I hope to return to the field of technology afterwards. Since this is a workshop focused on UNIV, Inspire 2021, this is me when I was at UNIV more than 10 years ago, when I was in university. And yes, I can testify that the Italians still park like this in ways that you consider physically impossible practically, and definitely a bit inconsiderate. I'm not really sure how anyone is supposed to get into the passenger side of that vehicle, but this is still a common sight in Rome. So as a heads up, I'll also be asking you to reflect and write at several points during this talk. So I hope you have a phone or traditional pen and paper handy. So the first aspect, personal development, a bit broad. You might think, I know why she chose a captain or nautical theme for this. It's to go with the theme of UNIV, which is navigate. And you would be half correct. But the other half will become clear if I contrast it with an alternate view of the university. Not one of a captain at a ship, but a bowl of popcorn, one of my favorite snacks as it happens. So not just any popcorn, but specifically microwave popcorn. What do you do with it? You unwrap it, you stick it in the microwave, you set it for 3 minutes, or maybe if you have a more advanced microwave, you hit the special popcorn button dedicated only to making popcorn. You wait for a bit, you check your phone, and boom, it's done. Maybe it's a little bit burnt, but still edible. This can be an easy attitude to fall into sometimes toward many of our experiences in life, our first job, our time in university, maybe that's how we felt in high school. And the problem with that is that it treats my education as something automatic or passive. I just set it and forget it. And then when I come back in 4 or 5 years, it's done. There I am, educated. And it's someone else's job to make that microwave, to create the perfect environment for me to develop in. And if I don't have a great experience, that means it was someone's fault. But let's try a different view. Here's a brief mental exercise. So imagine yourself in your first year of university. Maybe that's you right now. So just take a second, imagine where you are in life. All right, now fast forward to when you're in your last semester, graduating. Maybe for you that involves medical school, maybe it involves finishing your undergraduate degree. So now imagine that you had to make a movie out of everything that happened in between. What would the movie be of your life in university? What will the main events be? There will definitely be ups and downs, and there will be triumphs. There will be moments of embarrassment, perhaps. Hopefully, there will be moments of deep friendships, deep relationships. But in this movie, there is a protagonist, and you are the protagonist. You are out there making things happen. And so you and I are each the captains of our own lives. But to navigate, we need to know what key values guide me. What are my North Stars, to use again, a nautical reference, but what do I orient by, and what is my destination? What kind of person am I trying to become? So why do I need to stop and think about my key values? Well, I think it's fairly obvious, but again, just to put it in perspective, without those stars, it can be easy to let time go by without realizing what we're constructing, what narrative we're building out day by day. Because nothing great happens, whether that's building the Colosseum, a film set here in Rome, or running a successful business, or having a strong family. Nothing of that happens at that scale just because someone sat around and waited for things to fall into place. You look around at the success stories that you see in magazines, etc., and all of them involve initiative, dedication, hard work, many failures along the way, perseverance, asking for help from other people. So again, when universities are a place that prize talent very highly, and talent or being a genius may seem like something you're born with, but hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And the other reason I like the image of a captain is that while a captain has control over her decisions, she only has a certain amount of control over the situation that she's in. You cannot control the sea. You cannot control the wind. You can't control whether a piece of debris or a whale will suddenly come by and strike the boat and start causing problems. You can't control whether the sun will be scorching that day or pleasant. And university, and really all of life too, is like that. We do our best to be prepared, but then the conditions suddenly change. We can't control the waves, but we can control how we react to them. So on the high seas, there are captains, and there are captains, and there are captains. And each of you has a different personality, different strengths, and you're facing different seas with different conditions. Perhaps you're floating on the Mediterranean, or perhaps you're in the North Pacific, or perhaps you're in outer space. But regardless of which sea you're in and what kind of captain you are, we all need to have clear which stars we are steering by. Perhaps you've seen the latest Pixar movie, Soul. For those who haven't, the main character one of them is Joe, who's pictured on the left. He's a middle-aged musician in New York. And through a series of very strange events, he ends up swapping bodies. He ends up in the body of a cat, and he meets another person, the smallest figure on the right, the blue one with a round face, who is a person who has never been born, soul number 22. And soul number 22 ends up in Joe's body. So together they go around New York discovering the joy of simple things in life and what it means to have purpose, what it means to be born for something, what it means to have a mission. So at one point, they go to the barber shop that Joe always goes to. And Joe normally has been very focused on himself, talks about his own projects, but he's never talked much with Des, the barber, about himself. Whereas 22 is much more curious and observant in her first time here on Earth. And so in Joe's body, she asks Des, she says to him, "They say you're born to do something, but how do you figure out what that thing is?" Des replies, "I never planned on cutting heads for a living." 22, "Wait, but you were born to be a barber, weren't you?" Des replies, "I wanted to be a veterinarian. I was planning to when I got out of the Navy. Then my daughter got sick, and barber school is a lot cheaper than veterinarian school." 22 sympathizes, "Well, that's too bad. You're stuck as a barber now and you're unhappy." Des replies, whoa, slow your roll there, Joe. I'm as happy as a clam. Not everyone can be Charles Drew inventing blood transfusions, but I get to be interesting folks like you, make them happy, and make them handsome. I may not have invented blood transfusions, but I most definitely am saving lives. And from this conversation, you can deduce what one of Des's North Stars is from the narrative with which he tells his life, particularly this job choice where he had a dream of becoming a vet, but because of the sickness of his daughter, he decided to become a barber instead. And so while I wouldn't say that his key value here is saying is family over work, because that's a bit overly simplistic, you can definitely see that he's thought, well, when my family really needs me, I am willing to sacrifice my personal career dreams. And you also see that he's not bitter about it. Perhaps there's some wishful regret there, but it's not real regret because he knows he's made a choice consistent with his most important values, and he's happy with that knowledge. So we've reached our first reflection exercise. Grab your phone or a piece of paper and write down what are the core values I have for myself as a person. Not your professional or technical goals, but what I've put here is you can think of them as eulogy values, the eulogy being the speech that people often give at funerals or at memorial services. And people generally don't say in those moments, well, she was such a genius and she made sure we never forgot she was the smartest person in the room. Generally, they don't go with that line. They often say she always had time for me. She listened to me. She was so dedicated to her family. So I'll give you just a moment in silence just to think about what are my core values? What kind of person do I want to be? Okay, so perhaps you have 5, perhaps you have 1 or 2. What's so important is not so much the number, but that you're aware of them, that you're reflecting about them and have them more at the top level of your consciousness rather than something you've never perhaps stopped to formulate. And so once you have more awareness of those core values, these become your guiding stars. Right now, for instance, a lot of you may be dealing with seas that are windier than you expected. For example, there's what you might call the quote unquote normal challenges of university. There's an increased workload, you feel out of your depth. Perhaps you're dealing with insecurity and you feel like you need to look smarter than you actually feel all the time. You're making decisions about your future, maybe what to study, what classes to take, which opportunities to take advantage of that don't have clear, obvious answers. You're navigating social life and relationships. And all of this is a lot. It's quite a significant process to go through for anyone. And then on top of that, of course, right now we're facing challenges that no one expected due to the pandemic. Of course, all of you know these, and depending on your countries, it's different, but perhaps you're living at home with your parents because your university is closed. Or perhaps you have classes online and it's really hard for you to concentrate and get the same out of them. Psychological and mental well-being is much harder to maintain. You don't have the normal social life that comes with living close to your campus. And you may have family or friends that have been much more severely affected by the situation. And so all of these are not just, your typical storm you see, but these are very serious waves coming at your ship. And you're the captain, you're supposed to make a call. What's the plan of action? So before becoming overwhelmed by it, it's good to stop and take a deep breath, take a step back and look at the situation, look at your stars, look at them, and also ask other people whose judgment you trust. Those people are those other captains that are out there on the sea. Perhaps they have years more of experience sailing, or perhaps they're people who maybe even have your same age, but you trust their judgment. And you have their number, their email, even their physical address, perhaps. And then you, with your actions, as a captain, you grab the helm and you start writing out the narrative of your life for that day. What will the page for today say? Perhaps there's one day where it starts, again, we have many names. Let's say your name is Maria. Let's say today's page includes the following line. It was at this moment, faced with a looming deadline, lack of time, and insecurity about her abilities, that Maria felt panic stealing over her like a dark cloud. But the rest of the page is unwritten. What will it say after that? Will it say, and then she gave in to the feeling of being overwhelmed and she just stopped trying? Or will it say, and at that point, she decided to make the best of the situation she was in. She was going to stay up working on it for 2 more hours and then was going to go to sleep. And while she knew that it wouldn't be perfect, that was okay. These are all endings that we have available to us that we can write down, and only we can write them down. They're not predetermined. So to summarize, personal development, using your core values to chart a course and then react to unpredictable conditions. Our second, intellectual development. So this is a personal story. In Princeton, in roughly 2009, I was in this building called 1901 Hall, and I was part of a food co-op there, which is a group of about 20 students that, instead of paying to eat in the dining hall, which was fairly expensive, we decided to get together, buy groceries in bulk, and then we would take turns cooking for the whole group. And one night at dinner, my table got into a debate about the value of human lives. And the discussion was provoked by an event that made headlines in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2009. It involved a hospital in Louisiana where the backup generators were working for 48 hours roughly after the hurricane hit, but then they suddenly stopped, which meant there was no power and there was also no elevator. And this was a hospital with multiple floors. And so evacuations were happening on the roof of the hospital via helicopter. So if you wanted to evacuate a patient, you had to physically carry them up to the top floor of the hospital. And again, these are very extreme conditions. So 24 hours after the backup generators failed, one of the doctors, Anna Poe, and certain other doctors gave injections of morphine and midazolam. Again, I'm not a pharmacist. So they were giving these injections to certain patients who were in a more critical state. And so after everyone was evacuated and once people were able to enter the building much later, there were 45 bodies that were recovered from the hospital. And the forensic pathologist determined that 4 of these deaths were homicide caused by human intervention. So basically the interpretation was that Dr. Poe and her colleagues had decided to intentionally euthanize certain patients that they believed were not going to make it out of the hospital under any circumstances because of the limited time and lack of power. Ultimately, the grand jury in Louisiana decided that there would not be charges brought against her for homicide. Again, without understanding all the legal details, my understanding is that as an emergency situation, there are very different regulations at play. And so the burden of proof is much higher. And so the grand jury apparently saw that there was not a legal basis to bring a solid case for homicide. So this all provoked the discussion at my dinner table. Do you think every life is equally worth saving? And in this situation, of course, there were many logistical factors. If a patient was on a higher floor, of course, it was easier to get them to the roof. And triaging is a normal part of medicine. When you have many patients, but limited resources or people, and you can't save everyone, you have to decide who gets, the one remaining oxygen tank, who gets prioritized for evacuation. But we wanted to get to the essentials. We said, all right, let's assume logistics were not a problem. Putting that aside, do you think that all lives are equally worth saving? And one of my classmates was on the no side. I was on the yes side. And he was a math major. As I recall, his name was Eric. And he pressed, would you really consider someone who is brain damaged in a coma as being equally worth saving as someone who is fully conscious and has no mental impairments, but maybe bedridden? He would say, how can you say that all humans have equal value, regardless of their state or capabilities? And so I was giving him my reasons as best I could. Other people were contributing different opinions. And the two of us kept discussing this, debating this, until long after the rest of the people had left. It was my job to clean up the kitchen. So he even stayed and was like helping me clean up the kitchen so we could keep debating this. And he was really pushing me, like, how do you defend the idea of that there is a human race and that just being a member of that species gives you value? And I felt frustrated because I didn't know how to respond with the counter arguments that he was giving me. I felt a bit humiliated because he had clearly put me on the defensive and I wasn't able to give responses fast enough or think of them. But afterwards, I was actually glad that he had pushed me to that level of examining my beliefs. And so almost 10 years later, here I am in Rome studying philosophy because my time in university raised many questions for me like this that I wanted to understand. And universities are a special place because they're dedicated to the life of the mind. They value knowledge for the sake of knowledge. They value the exploration of ideas, of research, the value of intellectually rigorous work. The currency there is reasons and arguments and evidence. And you have this ability to ask big existential questions. In my limited experience of the business world, while it's not that the business world discards those completely, it's a very different set of priorities. The focus is more on productivity. It's what is the bottom line this quarter? Have we made a profit? Has our team impressed upper management enough to secure resources or get promoted? Of course, universities have politics, workplace politics as well. But there are certain topics that are more off limits because they're not considered relevant. For example, if you were at work, in a typical business office, it would be a bit strange and perhaps considered rude if you suddenly started pressing your colleagues to explain their political beliefs or their ethical beliefs or their religious beliefs, and you started a full-on debate. Whereas in the university, in my experience, there is more of an environment that anything is up for discussion. If you have a belief, you should be able to defend it. We can talk about anything that's interesting, not just what's relevant to the project we're working on here and now. And universities are a place where so many ideas are born, they're put into language, and they're spread and transplanted into the minds of millions. You have professors who are interviewed as experts on national news shows, or they're cited by other authors. And it's an environment full of young students who are maturing intellectually, but they're still in that process. So they come in full of interests and ideas and problems they've seen and they want to solve. And they absorb the ideas around them, they talk about them, and they internalize them, they make them their own. And these ideas don't come from nowhere, of course. Some of them come from life itself, from experience. Sometimes ideas are generated from other ideas and then tried out on life. And if the starting ideas are shaky, applying them in real life without knowing how it's going to turn out can be a bit disastrous. And so one of the head curators of TED Talks, Chris Anderson, said that ideas, if communicated properly, are capable of changing forever how someone thinks about the world and shaping their actions both now and well into the future. Ideas are the most powerful force shaping human culture. You might think, okay, yes, ideas are powerful, but the most powerful force, wouldn't that be politics? Would it be money? It's an interesting question. I don't claim to think there's a definitive answer, but there's several other people who have thought in similar lines, including the founder of UNIV, a Spanish priest named Jose Maria Escriva, who used the example of snowy mountains. He said, have you seen the snowy peaks of the great mountains? They are the great ideas and the great intellects. They may seem distant, remote, but from this snow comes the water that makes the valleys fertile. So the idea being the snow on the mountain seems very far away, but as it melts, that is what trickles down. That's what forms rivers flowing down the mountain. And that is what gives life to the entire valley. And so depending on what kind of water is there at the top, you may have a valley that is very full of life or one that is perhaps contaminated. Or to use an example from a completely different source, this idea of that ideas have a very powerful effect. You may remember the movie The Devil Wears Prada. and the cerulean effect. So in this scene, Anne Hathaway's character watches Meryl Streep's character on the right debating between two almost identical belts. And Anne Hathaway's character expresses her disdain for the fashion industry. Like, who cares? Like, what's the difference between these two? And Meryl Streep turns around and gives her a very biting response. Unfortunately, I cannot imitate Meryl Streep's incredible accent, so you'll just have to deal with mine. So she says, "What you don't know is that your sweater is not just blue, it's not turquoise, it's not lapis, it's actually cerulean. You are also blindly unaware of the fact that in 2002, Oscar de la Renta did a collection of cerulean gowns. And then I think it was Yves Saint Laurent, wasn't it, who showed cerulean military jackets? And then cerulean quickly showed up in the collections of 8 different designers. And then it filtered down through the department stores and then trickled on down into some tragic casual corner where you, no doubt, fished it out of some clearance bin. However, that blue represents millions of dollars and countless jobs. And so it's sort of comical how you think you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry, when in fact, you're wearing this sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room." Of course, everyone can stop now and think about what they're wearing, but that's a separate aspect of life. So what happens with fashion, according to the makers of this movie, also happens with ideas. The ideas that 10 or 30 or 50 years ago, professors and intellectuals were teaching in psychology or politics or philosophy are now put into practice by entire institutions in real life, or they're captured in Instagram posts without any citation because these ideas have come to be seen as common sense, as obvious, as not needing defending, because those ideas have become part of our culture. So even if you're not contemplating academia as a career, your ability to think and dialogue at that critical level is essential because it allows you to have a worldview that is well-informed, that is holistic, not rigid or narrow-minded. It gives you an ability to understand and solve complex problems which exist in every field. And it gives you the strong basis to pursue the truth and to try to right injustices when you see them, because you've developed that critical eye and that ability to catch these patterns, to catch these ideas. So here we come to the second reflection, writing down your goals for your intellectual life as a student. So some examples I've put up here if they're helpful, but just take a minute and think, again, with regards to my intellectual life, what are my core values? And so after this exercise comes the next quick one, which is pick one of those values or goals and think, what is an obstacle to that I can remove now? Or what is an opportunity that I can create to achieve that during my time in university? So for example, maybe you think the obstacles are external mainly. I don't have enough time. My environment isn't helping me. I don't have people I can turn to for advice. Or you might think it's more of an internal obstacle. I'm not very organized. I'm not very motivated. I don't study very well. I have learning difficulties or health challenges. And so think, what's one small thing I can do to change that environment to help make this outcome more possible? All right, so I know there's probably, you could keep thinking, but hopefully there's time in the discussions afterwards or in between sessions where you can keep developing this if you want. But as a student, I would say that one of the best skills that you can work on right now is that of being present in the moment and really concentrating, learning how to think deeply and study deeply and not just absorb information and regurgitate this. And this is probably the skill that I wished I had learned in university that I did not. I am still learning how to do it now. So I say this from a place of, I wish I could give back myself this advice 10 years ago, to really be present in class, to set aside time to study intentionally and not just wait until the last minute, as we all have done. But it's hard to get motivated, right? If you're sitting in a really boring lecture, it's like, why should I even bother? I could be more productive doing other things, maybe, sending messages, what have you. So another story I wanted to share. Several years ago, I was living in Boston and working at Google. And I love the environment there. There's a very intellectually curious and open environment, but it was really hard for me to work in a concentrated way because I was constantly task switching. I would say be writing a document because that was my job, to write technical documentation. But then I would open the internal company meme website, which is just infinite. And I would get lost there for, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes. And then I would come back to my document. But then maybe 10 minutes later, I would go get a snack because they have snack rooms down the hallway. And then I would come back and maybe check some messages, respond to some people who had chatted me with questions. So maybe in 2 hours, I only did like 20 minutes of actual work. So I was wasting time every day. I was not delivering work that represented the best I could do. And this went on because it was a habit I never had developed, that of learning how to concentrate well and filter out distractions. And so I had been talking with someone about this who was like my personal coach at the time, and she knew that this was a problem I had. And so she'd been giving me advice, she'd been giving me encouragement. She would say, think about like, what are your motivations for doing this work? What kind of person are you becoming by working this way? What's a small goal that you could try to set this week to get better? And then one time she used the following example from the movie Karate Kid, which really helped me and has stuck with me ever since then. So I don't know if you have seen this movie. So this idea of great minds, again, you're training for life, great minds think for life. And in this movie, there's a young boy, Daniel, who wants to train in karate. And so he asked this veteran master, Mr. Miyagi, to train him. And so Miyagi agrees, but instead of starting him on karate lessons from day one and teaching him how to do kicks and jumps, Miyagi sets him to work waxing his car, as you see on the left here, or painting his fence. And he also insists that he do it in a very particular way, up and down for the fence. You have to paint it up and down. And so after a couple of days, the young boy, Daniel, is fed up with this. He says to him, I'm being your slave here. I've been doing all your chores, but we made a deal. You were going to teach me karate. I've been sanding your decks. I've been washing your car. I've been painting your house. He's like, that's it. I've had it. I'm leaving. And so he starts walking away. And then Miyagi barks at him, Daniel-san, come back here. And so the boy sulkily comes back and faces him. And Miyagi says to him, show me the moment, sand the floor. And the boy's confused because he's been sanding the floor all day. So he gets on his knees to start doing it. But the master says, nope, stand up. Show me sand the floor. So he does the movement that he's been having to do to sand the floor. He's like, okay, I'm sanding the floor. And he says, now show me wax on, wax off. So he's like, okay, wax on, wax off. He's like doing the motions, but he's really confused. Now show me how you paint the fence. So the fence, he says, okay, going up and down. And finally, Miyagi says to him, now show me paint the house. So painting the house, he's like, okay, you told me to do this motion, right? And so Miyagi says again, now show me wax on, wax off. And so the boy starts to do the motion, and all of a sudden, hiya! Miyagi throws a punch at him, and the boy blocks it. He's completely surprised. And he says, now wax off. And he does it again. Miyagi throws another punch, and the boy also blocks it. And it turns out that all of those chores that he was going through, what had seemed like slave labor at the time, was actually the training and preparation for karate that Miyagi had wanted to give him the entire time. And he was testing his obedience and two, his discipline. And so you can think, well, what is my wax on, wax off right now? What seems like a mindless, pointless chore, seems like repetition, but is actually training me. So for example, like I mentioned, it might be paying attention in a boring class. Resisting the urge to open another tab for just 5 more minutes is building that muscle. double checking the footnotes I have on a paper I'm about to hand in. It may seem like a drain, but again, if I want to be ready to produce good research, to, again, high level work, I have to be able to put in that drill time of checking my footnotes. And so when you're practicing these mental skills that perhaps no one sees, but that are actually building up your mental muscles, you are ready. In that moment, when someone throws a punch at you, you respond. That punch might necessarily be something bad. It might be an opportunity to have a conversation with an expert in the field that you want to study. Or it might be the fact that you have a weekend and you were planning to study for your exam that weekend, but something happens in your family. And suddenly you're not able to yet. The study time is gone. But because you've been studying already while you were in class, trying to pay attention and taking good notes, you're actually able to recover from that loss of a weekend. And so, quoting here from Elon Musk, I think it is possible for ordinary people to choose to be extraordinary. So my question from ever since I was told that example from Karate Kid is, what are my wax on, wax off moments right now that I'm not taking advantage of? So our last stop is that of service, orientation towards service. And I'd like to bring you to Colombia in 2001, where a friend of mine, Diana, was a recent college grad working as a chemical engineer. And Colombia was going through a very difficult time with prolonged guerrilla warfare. There was a lot of poverty in the city, there was unemployment. Because of the ongoing warfare, there was destruction of infrastructure, transportation, there were kidnappings and ransoms. And one day, the head of the company where she worked called a meeting with all the employees and proposed to them something unusual. He proposed that each of them donate 5% of their salary over the course of 1 year. And he said, we're going to use this money that you donate as the seed capital to start a new business that can employ local people. And amazingly, everyone in the company agreed. And they did it again another year. And this model was so successful that it was even replicated in other businesses. And now, to this day, there is a foundation that promotes this work. Again, local businesses taking donations out of their from employees' salaries to start other businesses. And the foundation is called El Cinco, the five, to make a reference to that original 5% that each of the employees donated. And so I asked Diana, but why do you think this idea succeeded? That's pretty risky, not everyone can pull that off. And she said, I think when people really want something, they use all the means that they have within reach. And this person was a very good manager. You need to have a good head for this. So he worked hard and he was very intelligent and used all his skills at his disposal. And she said it was also a real necessity. It was easy to motivate people because you could see the good that it generated. And when you can see, again, from the situation of the country after many years, when it's every man for himself, no one gets ahead. And so we needed solidarity. And when there is so much need, you are constantly asking yourself, what can I do? What can I do? And so when someone gives you the opportunity to be able to help, then thanks be to God, many people responded generously. Many employees who signed up in this chain reaction of solidarity. And so I was struck when Diana told me about this because it said a lot about what this person was like, her boss, that he had strong connections with the community, that people trusted him, that he was also a good businessman. And so he, again, had this service-oriented mindset. It wasn't just how can I make my business successful, but realizing my whole community is suffering and there's something I can do about it. And so regardless of what you're studying, if we were in person, I might ask some of you to tell me what you're studying. Maybe it's nursing, maybe it's mathematics, maybe it's engineering, maybe it's comparative literature. And so even if what you're studying seems very abstract, like, I don't know, theoretical physics, that's kind of the most abstracted thing I can think of right now. This aspect of service should be present in a university. And when I say service, that doesn't necessarily mean, okay, all the students should set aside 10 hours a month to work at a soup kitchen. It's also forward-thinking, future-thinking service, because one of the best services that you can do is studying really well right now to be the best professional that you can be in whatever you end up working in. It's an investment in your future self, and it's also an investment in the future of your community. So this also brings me back to UNIV. I had mentioned that Jose Maria Escriva, a Spanish priest, founded UNIV in 1968 when he was living in Rome. And he had been working with university students as well for many years. Here's a picture of him in Madrid when he was still a young priest, with university students in Madrid. And he wanted to encourage these young people to be the best students they could be, to think big, and to use their talents to change society for the better. And so I believe tomorrow you'll actually hear from one of the UNIV representatives about what it will be like this year. Of course, normally it's actually in Rome for a week. But the core mission is still very much alive, even if it's completely online, because he wanted to help students lift up their gaze, to see their lives in perspective with the world around them, and to know that you don't need to become a Nobel Prize winner or an elected representative, in politics to make real change happen. Why? Because change happens locally first. Even a famous economics professor who wins a Nobel Prize has to start out by being an excellent colleague who shows up to class, who cares about their students, who creates a good environment in their own university. And so the people who live in a community are the ones who know it best because they're the closest to it. They understand its needs. They have those personal relationships like Diana's boss, who can make a huge, long-lasting difference, but that took a lot of time. So just to finish, here's some images from UNIV in previous years. Again, we'll still have the internationality, the exchange of ideas, hopefully those encounters where you share not only ideas, but also experiences of what happens in your community, what problems you see, what solutions you see. And so again, we've looked at personal development, intellectual development, and being service-oriented. And so whether you're in the beginning or the middle or the end of your time in university, maybe you're well even out of university, it's never too late to look at your stars and to reset the course, because you are the captain of this ship. So thank you so much for your attention. And now I'm happy to take any questions you have or comments or experiences you'd like to share.
Thank you so very much, Lauren. It's been fantastic. So what we'll do for the questions, the same as the last session. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, digitally speaking, and we'll throw it out there. If anyone has a question that they'd like me to ask for them, although I prefer that you ask it yourself, but if you want, you can send it also to me and I'll ask it that way. So we have one question to start off with, Lauren. You talked about the university as a place of debate now in your intellectual development and a place to go deeper into these questions and dialogue above all. But do you have any tips for that? Or do you think that it's not a utopic idea? Maybe it's because in Canada, we really struggle with this idea of political correctness, but sometimes we find that it's hard to dialogue because of being shut down. So how to generate that place of dialogue?
I can offer some ideas, but again, if I haven't lived the exact same situation, because again, I think each university can be very different depending on the culture that it creates. So you might go a couple kilometers over and find a university with a very different culture. I think the dialogue starts off with a relationship of trust between individuals. So you can't top down impose a culture of dialogue. That's why there are companies that dedicate entire departments to creating our office culture. I got to see a bit of this at Google, where they really take the idea of office culture very seriously. Like, culture is something we have to think about. We have to be intentional about it. We have to have strategies and people dedicated to creating this. And then you have to have good people who are also willing to take initiative. Just as a small example, for there are sinks where you can, leave your coffee cup or your plate. Because, there's different kitchens around the office, and so you could put a sign up, like telling people, like, don't leave your dirty plates like elsewhere in the kitchen, like put them in the sink. But telling people what to do only goes so far. At a certain point, like, people have to adopt this value of, I'm being a considerate person by doing this. I am contributing to making someone else's life easier. Like, I'm the cleaning staff here, not like my servants who clean up after me. So you also have to find a way to convince people to take on that value and internalize it. So I would probably suggest that if you're in a university where at the university level, it's very hard to have dialogue in the student newspaper or in debates with an invited speaker, or in a class participation where it's much more formal and you feel much more judged, evaluated for what you're saying, perhaps start by talking with one person one-on-one, or a couple of friends who you know are interested in talking about a particular topic, and you want to have a kind of no filter, no holds barred discussion to really get to the root of the matter. Try talking with a very small group of people. And perhaps it will never reach the point in your time at the university where the entire class and the entire seminar will be at that level. But again, I think the most important discussions and most meaningful ones happen in those personal conversations outside of class. They may start in class with an idea that a professor mentions. So yeah, if other people have ideas too, it'd be really interesting to hear, because it's not something I've ever had to face directly in terms of trying to solve it. But that's one approach that comes to mind.
Sure. If anyone has ideas, they can raise their hand and jump in also and share their experience. We have a related question here, which is, it's a very similar question, but it has the added component of how do we become confident enough in our own ideas? Because sometimes it's a question also of insecurity. So could you give us some advice on how to be confident in our own ideas when they're maybe contrary to what's sort of collectively agreed on?
I think it's a lot of us face insecurity when we get to university, in the sense of at your high school, which was smaller, perhaps you kind of knew where you stood, you perhaps had very good grades there, and then all of a sudden you're surrounded by many more people, and some of whom are extremely smart and very articulate. And I remember having classmates who were homeschooled. I'm not sure what it's like in other countries. I know in some countries homeschooling is actually illegal, but they had just already read like more than they had been more philosophy before coming to university than I read in like my 4 years in university. So it was a bit intimidating to listen to them having these debates. Like, I feel like an idiot right now. I have nothing to contribute to this conversation. So with insecurity, I guess one thing that's helped me is to think, like, none of you are actually stupid. Like, none of us here are stupid. Like, it's perhaps we need someone to explain things to us the first time. And that's the case with everything. Learning how to tackle a new program, or if you have a problem set in biology that no one's ever explained to you before. Again, some people are like actually smart enough to be able to just teach themselves calculus from a textbook, but that's not an indicator of actually being smart or not. So knowing I am an intelligent person who is trying to be open-minded and thoughtful and reasonable, and so if I ask a question and someone jumps on me saying, "I can't believe you don't know that," that actually is a reflection that they are not able to intellectually appreciate that teaching other people is part of what makes a good academic community. A good academic community is not one where all the smart people get together and like talk about how they can't believe how no one else gets it or can just jump to it automatically. So again, being confident in saying that asking a question, an intelligent question, should be accepted by people as, again, genuine intellectual. You're trying to push the intellectual force, like the conversation forward. One thing that attracted me about the philosophy department at my university was that I had taken some humanities classes, I had taken some science classes. I wasn't very good at science, didn't get good grades. And then the humanities classes, like in a literature class, they would use phrases like, "and here we're talking about the transmigration of souls." And I was like, what does that actually mean? But like no one else seemed to be wondering what that meant. And so again, it was like very complicated phrases, references to other authors that I'd never heard of. And then I got to a philosophy class and someone makes a claim and the grad student who is running the discussion is like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And the person's like, well, and so she would push back and then, "Well, how would you make that argument?" Like, it was a place where people were actually challenged to explain what the heck they were actually trying to say, instead of just, again, using complicated words to sound very smart. Again, this may just mean that philosophy was made for me, but like other people actually understand everything that happens in a comparative lit class. So I was like, okay, I like this environment where you can openly express that you don't understand exactly what the other person is saying. So with insecurity, again, start by just phrasing your question as like, "I'm curious, could you explain that to me again?" Or, "I'm not really sure I understood what you meant by that. Is there something you would recommend that I read?" So again, it's not like, "Oh, I'm ignorant and therefore I should be insecure," but it's impossible for everyone to know everything about everything. And so if I'm asking you a question to help understand it better, you should be able to just gracefully say, "Okay, oh, Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to explain that to you. I think the second part of your question, of course, is trickier, like when there are ideas that are accepted as practically being dogmatic. How can you express the fact that you think there might be another way of seeing the situation? I mean, I don't think the answer is to have like a kamikaze complex, like I'm just going to commit like academic suicide here and just, stand up in front of the professor and declare myself like, I don't agree with you. And I think, I don't know, your reasons are wrong for this reason or this reason, and you walk out. Like, there's no need to necessarily do that. In terms of actually facing it on a day-to-day basis, I think I would start, if I was in that situation, I would start by, again, listening, really trying to understand the arguments from the other side. Think, do they actually have good arguments? Like, okay, I can see that if you believed A and B, then yes, you would probably conclude that C is true. Maybe I think A is completely wrong, but I can see why they believe it. And so maybe you start by just asking those clarifying questions like, well, it's not quite clear to me, like, why would you think that A is true? Because I've seen other situations where it seems that, D is true. So again, trying to create a culture not of dialogue that's like attack, like me versus you, and one of us has to win. But like, I really want to understand why you think that. And I think there are reasons why people might be in disagreement. And could you help me understand what you would say to someone like that? So not making it personal, but again, really trying to understand their arguments first and then understand your own arguments as well. Like, do I have equally rigorous arguments that I could present?
Fantastic. We have time for one more question, so I'll give the floor to Ana Maria, who has her hand raised there.
Hi, are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I am currently a second year university student, right? And it has been really challenging for me specifically to really focus on my online classes, especially the ones that tend to be really long on Zoom, like they tend to go a long time. So I liked what you were saying with the university aspect. So my question is, how does someone stay committed to being the best student or being the best, worker or wherever they are? How do I stay committed to that, committed to my future self, committed to my future communities that I will be in service to? Because, it could feel really easy now coming to this workshop and I'm like, yes, she's talking about being the best. And I'm like, yes, to my work. And I'm like, yes, I'm going to do it. But then Monday, I'm tired and I don't want to be in class and I don't want to be there. And my teacher's talking forever. So how do I stay committed to that goal of being the best person that I can be?
I really appreciate your honesty and sharing that with everyone, and being like, this is the real situation. I think actually Rashad will probably talk a lot about that, with how do you, again, keep your motivation focused, especially. So I guess two ideas that come to mind are, one is the more theoretical level, like, do I keep my goals present? And another is the practical level, like, am I actually taking concrete steps to try to fix or remove some of the obstacles that get in the way? So for example, you said online classes. It's, again, am I creating a study environment that sets me up for success? Do I have a morning routine? Do I try to actually clear distractions off of my desk? But of course, you may say, yes, I'm doing all that. But the problem is not my desk, it's the physical computer. Like, I have the entire internet at my fingertips and the professor has no idea if I'm actually paying attention or not. And so it's really just me versus myself right now. It's hard. It took me, I think I would say, well, I don't know, since I was out of school and then I was working for a while and then came back to school, it was hard to get back into a study habit, where you're trying to like be laser focused on one class, or like study the same book for like an hour and like actually finish a chapter instead of rereading the same paragraph like 5 times. And like, I still have no idea what I just read. So it takes time to develop that, to actually enjoy being concentrated. Because at first it's much more attractive to have that like short-term like pleasure hit. Like, I open a tab, I check the news, I check Instagram. I can study for this class later. It's recorded. I can watch it later anyway. And so it's not as attractive. So how do I envision the outcome of paying attention such that I actually enjoy that more than the short-term enjoyment of getting distracted? So again, it might be starting with a very small goal, like, okay, for the first 10 minutes of class, I'm going to try not to open anything other than the class itself, like whatever page that is. That may be really hard, that might take me like 2 weeks to actually do. So maybe after 2 weeks, I've managed to like actually not open anything else during the first 10 minutes of class. That's major progress. And so maybe the next week, like you have a major lapse and you are super distracted all week. That's okay. The next week, we start over again. All right, this week, maybe I'm just gonna take Monday. Just do one day at a time. For Monday, I'm not gonna open anything else during the first 10 minutes of all my classes. So a combination of, again, the values, like, what am I doing this for? I love what I study. I want to have intellectual habits that will serve me for the rest of my life. They'll serve you in the workforce as well. You can really set yourself apart from your colleagues. Like, we had an open office setup. And so you can see when everyone else is on other tabs and like looking at YouTube and like memes or whatever. And so people are pretty open about it actually because it's open office. So you can set yourself apart from those colleagues if you are really able to like come into the office and like work really well for 3 hours and take a break because you completely deserve it, get a coffee, talk with a friend. And you've produced higher level work in 2 hours than some people can produce in a whole week because they're working in like fragmented distraction bits. So I would recommend attending Rashad's talk, but those are some ideas you can play around with.
Thank you, Ana Maria, for your question, and Lauren for the answer, and also for your wonderful talk. I think you've given us some great ideas to think about and discuss again in the small groups about having those North Stars, seeing where your values are, where you're going, keeping up that hunger for intellectual development and always looking to others. So fantastic. Thank you so much. There were possibly other questions. We're going to move into the Compass discussion now, just to not get too late. I know that for Lauren, for example, it's 10:30 at night also. And for those of you in Europe, in Ireland and everything, it's getting late now. So we're going to open our discussion groups. The idea for the discussion groups, before we do that,